Hello, and thank you for listening to Critical Thinking is Required. You're about to listen to the Critical Thinking is Required Literature Series 3. So this is our third book that we've chosen to go over, and it's an interesting book because I would have never thought this would be it. But I read the first one was For New Liberty by Murray Rothbard. The second, Vices Are Not Crimes by Lysander Spooner. And then now we're going to be talking about Achieving Freedom, Part 1, How Not to Achieve Freedom by Stefan Molyneux. And I believe this was written in 2007. It was kind of hard to find, but so there's a difference too in contrast to the other two books. And so I guess I have to, by natural law of libertarianism, I suppose I have to just tell everyone that about my opinions of Stefan Molyneux, and to remind everyone that we're here to think critically. Like that's it's called Critical Thinking is Required. So we're thinking critically. It's not accepting what Ron Paul says as truth and just saying yes. It's thinking about what he's saying, why he's saying it, what bias, what motives does he has, and then we agree or disagree with it. And we might not even agree with everything, but maybe most of it. And then we can change things. We can apply something else that we heard from someone else and apply it. And the same thing, I mean, Stefan Molyneux is human. He's a human being just like everyone else. As far as my understanding, he's not a robot. He's not the second coming of Jesus, at least as far as I know, again. And so he's imperfect, okay? And what that means is that we can then, basically what that means is that everything he says is not truth, okay? It might be a journey and a step towards truth, and that's great. But there's room for criticism, okay? I'm not judging him as his character. I'm not judging him as a person in any of this episode. I'm judging, or I'm criticizing, because I think it's quite different, his what he's produced. So what he's homesteaded, what he's transformed when he wrote this book, okay? And that could be argued, right? Whether you actually have a property right in a book that you publish, but and this is an interesting one because he's provided it for free. So I've also provided the link to it, just like I did with the previous two literature series. And so you can actually read the book too. So if maybe you don't trust what I say, maybe you want to understand more about it, well, you read the book, and I suggest you do. But I would not recommend reading it, at least not this one. This is the only one I've read by him, because I feel like this episode will generally go over everything that you need to hear, and I don't know. There's other books that I think are more important to the libertarian movement, or if you're progressive, to progressivism, etc., or to freedom. And I think we'll cover everything. And of course, you can listen to other people as well. And so I just wanted to put that out there. I also wanted to put out there that I'm not a huge fan of his. I recently discovered who he is. I'm still pretty new at all this stuff. And I guess he's like pretty huge. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end as well, as far as in the libertarian circle or community. But I tried to listen to one or two of his shows. I just wasn't feeling it. It was a little too psychological for me, although I definitely could understand that there'd be a demand for that, but I'm just not like there yet. And then there were other turnoffs. For example, there was like a caller who called in one time, and he was very disrespectful towards him. It's like, and this is what I was thinking when I was running the other day, thinking about the show and what I would say. And so all I remember is that like the guy called up. It's a psychological show, it's like therapy kind of, and that's what he sells this as therapy, which is great. I think that's great to have therapy on the radio. I mean, that's online. That's awesome. And so this, especially people are willing to share this stuff. And this guy's like sharing his feelings, and there's like a time period of maybe like 30 seconds where it's dead silence. And Molyneux's like, I just can't have this. Like we're just gonna have to move on. And it's like, dude, if he's sharing his feelings, this is deep stuff. This isn't easy. And he's not only just sharing it with one-on-one with you, but he's sharing it with thousands or hundreds of listeners, right? So I don't know. If you're selling therapy, you've got to also be a therapist. When you're in a therapist chair, they're not going to tell you to stop. You need to say something. They're going to let you say it. They're going to wait. Now, when the time comes up, when your payment is done, then yeah, they'll stop. And so that I could understand if that's why he was stopping it, but it wasn't. And so I'm wasting a lot of time here, but I just wanted to talk about that. And I also wanted to say there was something else too, oh yeah, and then the other thing that I sometimes have trouble is like he's got these truth videos, like the truth of Ferguson, and I think I think it's great that people think that there could be a truth to it. I don't know if there could ever be a truth, and so I kind of have problems with the word. but that might just be a kind of silly criticism because I don't really know. But I don't know. I don't know the truth of everything. So, but maybe he does, I guess. But I don't. Even when I talk about all this stuff that I do in all the episodes, and we've done 69 episodes, you know, when I was talking about toll roads, I don't say that's the truth of toll roads. That's just what I know at that time based on some research, okay? And I don't think anyone knows the truth about toll roads and exactly everything about it that happened everywhere throughout in the world. So, yeah, so that's my long explanation, my long preface of complaints or people who will stop listening to the show simply because I'm willing to criticize somebody, and whether it's just or not, and you know, and that's the market too, right? So, but again, you don't have to listen to the show, right? But at the same time, this show is critical thinking is required, and there's a lot of things that we talk about where, you know, we're thinking outside the box, we're thinking, and that generally requires criticism in order to grow. So let's start the Literature Series 3, and it's Achieving Freedom, Part 1, How Not to Achieve Freedom. Okay, and I guess one more thing is that this book, I guess there's a Part 2, but I couldn't find it. And so this is How Not to Achieve Freedom, and I guess Part 2 is How to Achieve Freedom. And that really actually interests me a lot more. Like if I was going to read one of his books, that would probably be the one I'd be really interested, because it's great, you know, for all libertarians, especially on the voluntarist side or anarchism side. It's all great to say, you know, what do we do? You know, let's get rid of the state. But at the same time, what do we do when that happens? Like what, you know, how do we achieve freedom? Like how do we actually do that in practice? And how do we end the state? Like if that's what you think should happen, how do you do it? And I think those are really, really quite important questions that need to be discussed. And so he, and one last, I apologize. This intro is a little long, but at the same time, there's another problem too, is that the slide presentation and kind of what I'm going over, it's going to seem kind of unorganized, and I think that's because the book is kind of unorganized. So it's not. I could have spent more time, I suppose, just, you know, taking certain parts of his book and moving them left and right, and I tried my best to do that. But it's set up very complicated, at least for me personally. And so I apologize if some stuff just doesn't make sense because it seems out of place, or, you know, the book's pretty repetitive. And so I'm trying to make it more clear, but I don't know. I'm sure he worked on this. This might have been one of his first books. So I'm sure he's a much better writer now. You know, this is, you know, 7 years ago. All right, so he begins and talks about a problem. So this is sort of the problem. And this is what Murray Rothbard was talking about too. You know, we can all agree with this, that the system we have today, it's failed. He looks to the founders and he says, well, they intended to create this system, and it was to restrain this, quote, terrible master. So this is the government, the main aggressor, right? And the founders created this document, the Constitution, and this system, you know, the checks and balances and all this stuff, in order to rein in this powerful government that occurred multiple years, you know, generations prior to the revolution in America. But it's been a failure. Now, he is going to look at it and say, and a lot of libertarians do, is say, it can no longer be fixed, right? There is no other solution. But I would ask people to think about what parts work and what parts don't. And maybe they can't work. I mean, I don't know. I could do an episode, I think, on each part of the Constitution, and I think each part would fail. Like we could find a way to say, this failed, and then we could probably 99% of the time provide a better solution in the marketplace or somewhere else, right? But at the same time, when it's dismissed as a fail, and I guess my main problem with all these people who say things like the Constitution failed, it's that when you read the document, and I recommend, it's not very long, it's not libertarian. I have no idea. Like, and I was saying this before in other episodes, like talking about the 19th century and saying that, and even the 18th century, that these were libertarian times. They were not by any means. I mean, it was social. It wasn't socialism of the von Mises definition of, you know, full control of the means of production, but it was definitely similar to what we have today, and it might have actually been worse in some instances. Okay, like World War II. For example, and this is a little bit later, of course, after the revolution, but that was definitely worse than even today. You know, the regulation's bad, but they had like price controls and they had ration cards. Like, can you imagine that happening today? And so I don't know. I'm not there yet with that. I think there could be a document that maybe could be better. Maybe you take out certain parts or you don't follow them. I mean, I think that would be the better thing. It's just put in people in power who don't follow these certain things that the Constitution says you have to. And what I mean by that is like the Article 1, it says, they can have a postal service or build roads. Well, I don't think the government should be doing either of those things. So you'd solve it, right? Like it's one solution. And that goes to how to achieve freedom part 2, right? Like how exactly do we do this? And we can clearly see, and I'm taking a long time in this introduction, but I wrote an article on the blog for criticalthinkingIsrequired.com where we discuss voting, and I was thinking about this while I was taking a shower today, so you can have that mental image. And what I found really interesting is that, even in the blog entry, is that in our county, in Northeast Florida, there was a 17% voter turnout for a lot of these local positions like commissioner and all these weird things, right? And that's 17%. Right? Think about that. 17%. So 17 people out of 100 came out to vote, okay? So let's say that the only thing is a majority to win. So let's say 9 people actually voted for one the candidate. So all they would need is 9 people out of 100 to support a person who's now going to have that power. But guess what? Nothing's happened. It's not like the credibility of government's gone. It's not like government's gone. It's still there, even though only 9 people support it. Like out of 100. Isn't that crazy? So if we think of this idea that not voting helps, I don't know. Like they don't need a whole lot of people to support the system. It's going to be there because we don't care. But you know what? The bottom line is because of its credibility and stuff, we're still going to follow its laws and we're still going to follow its regulations and everything. Why? Because it can punish us and we're scared. So maybe if you could talk about that in achieving freedom, maybe there's some way to handle that. The Bundy situation is one example of where you could kind of apply some thinking there, but I don't know. And again, I apologize. I'm getting off task. Okay, so Molyneux talks about a triple threat. And he talks about there's 3, and this is a little confusing for me. It's 3 approaches to reduce power and the size of state is kind of what he said, but I don't really get that. Really, what I see is he's criticizing government. That's what part 1's about, right? And he's saying these 3 ways, these are the ways that don't work, okay? This political action, like I just said that it does work, or I'm not saying that it does work. I'm saying it could. We have no idea. And I'm also saying that not doing anything, that doesn't work. And we'll get, that's a really good thought. Maybe we'll get deeper into that. But there's triple threat: political action, academic education, and religious partnership. And we'll just get into it. I think that'll be easier. So let's talk about, we're going to give a brief synopsis of all 3, and then we'll get really deep into these topics. So political action. Well, basically, the idea is that one of the ways that we could reduce government, and this is how libertarians even think in the Libertarian Party or other places, they'd say, well, if the average citizen was just smart and motivated enough, a natural democracy would limit the state, right? So we could have people who would vote, and if only Ron Paul could win. If we could just have more Ron Pauls, then we could win. And we'll get into the kind of the problems I have with that as well, but that's just an example. Academic education. This is it's kind of similar, but it's if knowledge of the free market can be understood, researched, and communicated clearly, citizens will support limiting the state. So again, we have this problem of a deficiency of knowledge. If people just knew about people like Ron Paul and voted them in, if people just knew about the free market, they listened to Von Mises, Mises.org, and they listened to all that stuff that they publish and read all those books, then we could limit the state. And then religious partnership. Well, and this is kind of, I don't understand where this one fits in, because the other 2 are kind of like how we hope that something will happen, and then this is more of just one of the problems. So I guess what he's saying here is that the religious partnership is just why it's very difficult to reduce the size of government, because religious faith is the very bedrock of the anti-government movement, and we'll get into it because I don't really get this, but it's kind of like the idea that it's hypocritical, and we'll get into that. But he looked at Ron Paul. He pointed him out, saying he's a fundamentalist Christian who rejects evolution. The Mises Institute's a Catholic institution, I suppose. I think Tom Woods is. So, I mean, he always talks about this stuff, so maybe. Bob Barr, who was running for Libertarian Party around that time in 2007, well, he's a fundamentalist Christian. And so we'll get a little bit deeper into that, but I have some problems with that, but let's just wait until that. And yeah, so what he's saying is that libertarians are fundamentalist Christians, and he's co-hosted dozens of libertarian talk shows, and almost every caller has been one of those. And because there's an inherent it's illogical to believe in a supreme being, at least according to Molyneux, then it's illogical for me to vote you into office or to support you or to believe in you or your ideas, because if you're a liar in this part because you believe in some other God, then you're lying about, what system is better. So let's talk about political action, and we'll talk about that. And again, this isn't what I'm saying, this is Stephen Molyneux. So we're going to talk about political action. And so one of the common themes in political action, and this is like the voting system, et cetera, is money. Of course, money makes the world go round, right? And this happens in our political system. And the real money in libertarian circles comes from religion. So this is one of the three approaches he's looking at. And one of the things that happens is that what he's saying is that the Libertarian Party and this idea, it's mainly, the whole reason it's there is to get money. It's to make people rich. Right? It's just like someone trying to sell you a product. This is their profit motive, to make money. It doesn't matter. They don't want to limit government. They want money. And so he says, because there's this correlation between, all the callers were fundamentalist Christians, and I guess the libertarians are, and I don't even understand that because I've heard that they're atheists, so that sounds kind of weird. I hear the opposite from people who are either Christian or people who are progressives and trying to attack the character of people who are libertarians by saying, oh, you're an atheist. Oh, okay, well then you're evil, right? You have no ethics. And so I can't support this idea. And so, this is kind of weird. I might be skipping some of this stuff with the religion. It's just really weird. And there's a quote: if the funding of libertarian groups increases as the size of the state increases, then we can reasonably assume that those who run libertarian groups are actually being paid to increase the size of the state. All right, so this is a very interesting quote, because what he's saying is that because over the, since the 70s or whenever the Libertarian Party was created, because they get money from people and because they've continued to lose and the state has continuously gotten bigger, well, then it seems that the Libertarian Party, the whole purpose of it is to increase the size of the state. Why? Because there's an incentive, right? People respond to incentives. It might not be intended, but there's that incentive to make money. And I don't get that at all. I'm sorry, it passes right through me. I have no idea what that is. Like a correlation of, we drive a lot of cars on the road, and so it's contributed, it is global warming, like without looking at anything else. Like to me, it's something like that, or that might even be more real than that. So, but libertarianism, what is it? Well, he writes, it rejects theoretical proclamations, and what it does instead is it supports tangible, real-world empirical evidence. So we're looking at the natural state of man. We're looking at what really happens. We're looking at proof, and this is why you support libertarian. This is why you support the profit motive and price mechanism and all stuff, because it works. It's in contrast to Marxism or socialism, because those don't work, and we've seen it, right? And that's because it's a monopoly. That's because there's no price mechanism, and et cetera, et cetera. And so he compares this again to religion later on as well. And what's the goal of the Libertarian Party and libertarianism? Well, it's to reduce the size and power of state. Now, they've spent tens of millions of dollars devoted time and money in supporting this goal of reducing the size and power of state. And, in recent election for Ron Paul, I think it was in 2008, one of his bigger ones, they spent $20 million over that for his run. But it was never completed, right? They've never completed this. They've never achieved it. The party has probably not even really done anything, at least in the, if you're looking at the cost, in any business, right? You're looking at how much are you spending and what are you getting in return, right? What's the return on investment here? And clearly it's not working for the Libertarian Party, right? But maybe not. We don't know, because there's no empirical data, which is we're going to get in. And he would say it achieves the exact opposite, that the government's actually getting bigger. Now, again, I don't see the causation there, that because you're giving money to the Libertarian Party, the state's getting bigger. Like that. Yeah, but he writes, quote, any goal which has never once been measured in over 40 years cannot be considered a goal at all. So instead, the goal is to get money. Now, maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe it is to get money, but I do agree completely that it hasn't been measured. Okay, I don't even know if you could measure. He suggests a survey of calling people, so maybe some sort of like poll thing. I don't know if that would be sufficient enough to understand exactly the impact that Ron Paul, for example, or Bob Barr did in 2008. The example of what effect they had on the libertarian movement. Right? So anecdotally, we can all say, me specifically, and I'm sure many of the listeners, if not the majority of them, say, they've come to this idea through Ron Paul, and that's me personally, and then Tom Woods and some other people through the Mises.org, those type of people, right? And then I learned about Adam Kokesh and Stefan Molyneux and all these other people, and so, yeah, so I don't know, but I don't know how you measure that, because I was talking about this before in other episodes where I've always been thinking about when did I become a libertarian. I have no idea. I keep thinking it was like this time, and then it was this time, and then this time, but I think libertarianism really is it's a philosophy, right? So it's something you've probably had forever. I mean, it's natural, right? Like the non-aggression principle and all these ideas of mutual cooperation, that's just natural. That's not like an idea you can just, maybe it awakens in you, and then or maybe you're more motivated to read about stuff, but that's the whole point, right? That's the whole part of anarchy, is that the idea that naturally we all mutually work in the benefit of one another without even having to understand Mises.org and Ron Paul and all this stuff. So what he calls is the Ron Paul run, the presidential run, is this, quote, sleazy pattern. And there's two methods that are used to get money. And so these are the two methods that will be used specifically in the candidate of Ron Paul, but also by the Libertarian Party in general. And I've seen this as well, even here in Florida, is they'll make the argument that, well, Ron Paul will win. He's going to win, okay? And if he doesn't, because maybe they're getting scared because they look at the polls or whatever, well, at least it's an opportunity to educate. Or maybe he loses. Then they go, you know what? We educated people. That was why we did it, right? And I could completely understand this. I live in Florida, and there are, we had Lucas Overby, who was a great candidate. We have Adrian Wiley, who I think is a decent candidate for Florida governor, who I'd vote for both of those people. I have no qualms at all. None. I mean, they're going to lose anyways, so I have none. I have no problems if they're not, in fact, going to get in power. I mean, then it's just really a message that I'm trying to send to people. And so I don't really see a problem. But, that's another episode, because I'm sure many will disagree or could disagree. But, yeah, so, but I see the same two arguments, but to me, that's I don't know if it's politics or if it's necessarily business. I mean, that's what a business does. Google says, my computer is an Apple phone, right? My phone is the best. This is going to bring you happiness. This is going to make your life easier. Those are all lies. It's going to make my life more complicated because now I'm going to get in fights with my family because I'm on it all the time, or I'm not spending time with my family, or it's costing me money. I'm spending $100 on my internet service every month to get it on my phone and phone service. That's my point, is that we all lie. I mean, that's business, sort of. As long as it's not fraud, I don't consider that he, well, I don't know. Think about it. I don't know, but I just don't think I think he's going to lose, right? I know Ron Paul is going to lose. If you thought he was going to win in 2008 or maybe 2008, well, no. I don't know how you can imagine that he would have actually won. Like, there's just no way, if you're thinking critically, that you could think in any possible world where he could have won, where he 100% would have won. Now, I could have thought, and I actually do and did at the time, thought that he could have won, maybe like 75% chance. And I think that's still a little irrational, but because there's no empirical data to back that claim up. But for some reason, I thought life was different then. And then I've learned a lot since then. I've learned that today we're basically repeating all the stuff that we had in the 70s. We're living the 70s and 80s all over again right now. And then we were living the 40s and 30s all over again. And then we were in a Civil War era. So it's like, it's repetitive. And until you understand that, I suppose, you might actually think that he could win. I don't know, because I did. And so should we use violence to fight violence? Well, because that's the voting process, right? It seems illogical to use violence to fight violence. And politics, it's still violence. But it's a polite violence. So it's not killing someone, but he's using violence. Now, I might disagree with this. I've actually been thinking a lot. I'll be writing a couple blog posts soon about the non-aggression principle, trying to understand what violence is. I'm not at the stage right now where I would consider a slur to someone as violence. And I suppose Molyneux would maybe be someone who would think that would violate the non-aggression. I know Ben Stone from badquaker.com, which is a great show, he would say the same thing. I've heard him specifically say, saying your mama's fat, something equivalent to that is violent. That is aggression. I'm not there with that yet. I'm more of a direct harm kind of thing. Me punching you, even tapping you on the shoulder would be aggression. And so the quote is, we should use violence to reduce the growth of violence. It just doesn't make any sense. And I don't know what the solution, what you would use instead. And this goes back to my voting thing. And I don't know. I mean, if you're just voting, and I've talked about this many times before, especially on the blog, if you're just voting, I don't know if you're actually using violence. And I brought up I thought I brought up a decent question where, let's say we're slaves to the state. Okay, let's say we just have to live with these consequences that are chosen by the majority, or by these group of people. It's not even the majority, right? And they decide what we have to do. So, and we call them the slave master, right? Well, what happens when the slave master gives you a choice, whether it's real or not, but they give you some opportunity to say, you know what, if you want something changed here with what I do to you, you can tell me. And if enough of you, of my slaves, support it, I'll change that. Or I'll at least try. And I don't know if I see anything wrong with that. I'm sorry. What's the alternative? To just walk away and say, or no, I can't walk away, right? I'm a slave. So I just say, no, sir, no, sir. Continue this torture on me. And this is some of my qualms with the non-aggression principle too, because it's we're so theory-based that we're not pragmatic and looking at, well, what if we really want change? What if I want this place? What if I want this thing to end? What do I do? It's not going to, the state's not going to just move away. There's no magical button. It's been around for thousands of years, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands that we don't even know about. I don't know. How does a libertarian president reduce the government coercion, is what he asks. And this is one of the best examples. I think there's 2 or 3 sections in his book that just are are solid, that really help you think critically. And this is a perfect one of, what exactly do you do when when Ron Paul does win? What happens if he did win? And this is an example he gives. Well, let's say he becomes president and he decides to privatize the post office with a majority support. So he actually has a majority of people who support him. Now that could actually really mean 30%, or it depends what the voter turnout is, right? So we're forgetting that as well. But let's say the people generally support it, okay? Whatever that means. Now the unions, of course, because they're union employed at the post office, they don't want to lose their jobs, so they're going to protest. And what he then writes is, quote, society as a whole will shut down. I don't know if I agree with that. Because again, we're dealing with a small number of people, and I don't think all these people would actually protest, okay? And then you'd have to think, there's so many different things, but he says, if there'd be, roads, and let's say they went in a road and they just protested on a road, that it would just shut. I don't know. I don't see that. I think it would be like a Ferguson thing. We've all forgot about Ferguson already, right? It's nothing. And maybe it would be a little bigger, but I don't think it would change a whole lot of stuff. But I definitely could see where it'd be problematic. And I do, he talks about images, the media would be showing these pictures of, because you'd have to use police, right? And so you have a Ferguson on your hands. And so now people they're going to stop supporting you. They're going to say, why are you doing this? Why are you throwing, the newspapers will say, the post workers, the children will starve, right? And that's what they do, right? Even though it probably won't happen, but they're going to do that because it sells papers. It's all about money, right? And so the question is, what if they chose not to leave? Would force be used? What about all the political process? How would these images interact and change the politics of that environment where there were enough libertarian people to vote a libertarian person into a party, into position of power. And so you have that problem, and I can completely see that. Like at that point, I'm right on, like that. I could see something like that happening, but I think I don't know. I don't know if I like. Let's say you got rid of the Department of Education. Let's say I don't know necessarily, because of course I don't think society would shut down in any of these examples, but I do think that it would not be good politically, and it would not be good on the news. So you would have to have someone who's willing to stand and keep fighting and not change. But if you have a libertarian who's actually into power and they're actually deciding to privatize a post office, then they're probably similar to that. But I don't know. They could be a Rand Paul, and they could kind of change their views sometimes. So I don't know. But and so you're getting into really complicated stuff, right? So and it could be even worse. So he says it's the end of libertarianism for centuries. So the way the person reacts, and here's where you get in that iffy thing, is like, let's say it is a Rand Paul who's wavering and he changes instead and he says not to. Well, it's going to give libertarianism a bad name. And even if he didn't, all the images on TV and stuff are going to give it a bad name, and nobody's going to want to be a libertarian. And then he talks about contracts, and so you have a problem there as well, because then if you're saying, if you're privatizing it and you said you were going to give them money when they retired, that you'd have a problem. But my understanding is they do that anyways with unions. So you would probably just have to pay people out. You'd have to have get with the union. You're probably going to have to overpay. So that could be a problem. Or you just, the idea, this is a crazy idea, that the government says that a contract is void, that's rare. I don't know if I'd agree with that. Okay. So, I think the government probably doesn't adhere to all, contracts all the time anyways. They can find a way out, and I think they could in that instance. And then he talks about the violation of non-aggression principle. I don't really think it would be. So there's a question, because here's an example. If they're having a protest and they're at the post office with a protest, well, they've actually initiated, and the protesters, they've actually initiated violence. So you can then use self-defense and get them out, right? So, yeah, I don't really see that there, okay? And if they're in a public spot, then fine, let them be in a public spot. I don't even, what does it matter? Let them chant. Look at Occupy Wall Street. How many people were there chanting? Think of all these marches and stuff that's happened in the past few decades. And it's done nothing. We don't care. The government doesn't care. They just push it aside. And so infiltration. So here's another great thought too. So the other idea too is that, we're putting this Ron Paul in power, and we're attempting to control the power mechanism of government to work against its own purpose. So the purpose of government is to grow. It's to get bigger, right? And tax more and make revenue and and all that stuff. But the problem with that is that doesn't make sense. Like, how do you do something like that? And he asks, and he's respectfully requesting libertarians that if that's something you believe in, that you could actually do that. Well, why don't you try it out locally? Let's test it out. Let's do some evidence here. And so he gives an example of, why don't you join the KKK, and why don't you use it to instead promote multiculturalism and say black people are awesome, and we all hang out, and we're just a great, we respect human beings and we respect people of all colors, like that kind of thing. Well, that doesn't seem it seems kind of, illogical. Like that could never happen. And I think rightly so. So that's another really good one. But at the same time, I don't know. I would think, like, let's say, if you had a CEO, let's say someone like Steve Jobs, I'm trying to think of, I can't think of on top of my head, a CEO that was new, that came to an old company, right, and changed it for the better. Like, I'm sure this has happened multiple times throughout history where someone does that and they make things better. Or like if you joined, maybe you bought a company and like a health product, and let's say you sold bad foods at one time, and then you started selling healthy foods. Like, I think it's possible in that sense. But then again, there you have price mechanism and you have all that stuff. So I think it's a really great. Those two examples are really great examples of why it really couldn't work. But at the same time, and I would argue, is that When you infiltrate by putting someone like, let's say you put Ron Paul just into a Congress member, let's say, yeah, he's not necessarily stopping everything, but he's voting no. So at least he's not giving credibility to these laws that are passed. He's not saying, yes, I consent to that. He's fighting against it. If you get enough of those people, if in fact there was a majority society, then if you had all the politicians doing that, then maybe, yeah, at that point, if there were a president is a whole lot different than if you had, 250 Congress members who were libertarians, and the rest were Republicans and Democrats like that. I think the mindset that if that ever did magically occur somehow, which I don't think it would or could, that I don't know. I just think it would be easier to infiltrate at that point. And that would even answer the previous example of the ending the unions and all that stuff. Because at that point, if you have that much support where you have, a majority of people into Congress, unless they're not real libertarians, which is, so, and that's where you get back to, I vote, but I don't vote for all libertarians. I vote for only a libertarian I think is, really like basically an anarchist, that's basically going to vote no on everything. But I think it's a little bit more problematic with a governor. So I think you can have a question then. But then, like, let's say I had an offer, Gary Johnson or someone like that, and he ran for governor here in Florida. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm going to vote for the. Well, no, I'm not sorry. I don't care. I'd vote for the guy. You know why? Because what's the alternative? I have the other two. Again, the slave master's saying I have a choice. And maybe he's still going to do some bad stuff, but he's going to get rid of a lot of bad stuff too. So at least theoretically. And that's where I think he's trying to get in with what he's talking about, what with Molyneux is talking about with those two examples, that you could see politically how it might not work. And the average libertarians, that's one final point that he makes, is that, well, they're concerned about liberty because they feel unfree. And what they do is they project this lack of freedom onto society as a whole. And so what he's saying is that this average libertarian is that he's never going to be truly happy with, even if the government left, because he's not free himself. And that gets back to the psychological aspect, which I think we talk about near the end. So we'll get there. So next, academic education. So this is the second threat. And so one of the problems is that there's no testing. If education is paramount, and it's very important, why are there no tests or surveys to determine its success, right? So we're getting back to the Libertarian Party, and maybe this isn't actually in this section, but it's basically in the sense that why don't we test this stuff? Why don't we have empirical data to say whether it's successful? And yeah, I actually think that is part of the other one. So let's talk about academics. So now we're at academic education. I apologize. And so the goal of this concept is to preach free market economics. And then when you do that, the goal is to reduce the power of the state by preaching the free market economics through teaching about, Rothbard, etc. But one of the interesting things is that this person, the professor, someone like, we're talking about a professor through academics, well, they use the, quote, violent and corrupt environment, end quote, of the university, which is, quote, a coercive monopoly. And so here I have so basically this whole section is criticism of the academic institutions of universities and I'm assuming public universities and not private universities, or maybe private universities because they get some money they don't really get money. Well, I get a little confused here. I'm assuming he's talking about public. It couldn't be private, right? Because private's not, there's no coercion. It's all voluntary, right? Now, of course, some of that stuff is, there's some stuff from government, through school loans and stuff that kind of makes it a little unequal, I suppose. But then all businesses are unequal at that point. So I would think he's talking about public. And I wish he made these distinctions because I don't really know what von Mises is, or like the school in Alabama, Auburn, whatever the school is over there, the von Mises Institute. I'm assuming it's a private school. So I don't know if they necessarily have a monopoly. He argues that these teachers, these academics, well, they get salary not from the students, but from the approval of other academics and politicians. So again, I'm assuming public. And if so, then couldn't the government spread this message if just the right people were put in place? So what he's saying is that if you're going to use a public institution and you're going to be an academic there and you're going to advocate the free market, well, it's kind of back to the Ron Paul idea. If we're going to put this Ron Paul magical guy in, then why couldn't we just put him into positions of power? And if we did that enough, then we just have an awesome system, right? But it's just not going to happen. And yeah, so one of his problems, I think, he's getting back, I think, into one of the core problems of libertarianism versus anarcho-capitalism or anarchism or whatever you want to call it, is that how can someone praise the free market and say, this is what we need to get rid of the state, but then take part in this academic public system? So it's like, I guess it would be the same thing as, how can you be a libertarian and be in the military? How can you be a libertarian and work for the government? What if the professor praised multiculturalism and said, all races are awesome and tolerant of them and thought they were equal and all that, but then when they went home they went to a gated community where only whites were allowed? Well, that seems to be counterintuitive, right? It just seems a bit odd. And now I would slightly disagree in the sense of supporting the state, in the sense that if you are, let's say you're working for, well, I'm gonna be honest here. If you're a libertarian and if you want to be Ron Swanson, then be Ron Swanson, because damn, someone's going to fill that position. It's not like that position is going to go unopened. It's just like, are you going to? It's like, you take the benefits of the state. So don't tell me about being a libertarian. So unless you are completely off the grid in some remote place in, I don't even know what country, you'd have to be in Antarctica or something, you are basically living under the state, and you're benefiting from the state. So even if you lived in the country in Minnesota, in the middle of nowhere, and you built all your stuff, you lived off the grid, you're still benefiting, and you bought nothing except for what you produced. So you're talking there's probably one person who does that, who follows all of those criteria. Because of course there's agorism, there's all these ideas of having, growing your own food and all this stuff, but if you have to go somewhere and buy the product that's from someone else, that's up from the market, well, that doesn't really count. If you're buying it from somewhere that it eventually went on a road that was made from the state, well, you've already I can't agree with you. You can't try to sell. You're a hypocrite. And that's what Molyneux is saying, and I don't really get that. And I understand this example of, the teacher and the multiculturalism and all that stuff. But I think with the state, because, with the teacher, he consented to that. Like, he consented to moving to the gated community. So I think that's problematic, right? So it'd be like, So it'd be like if you then lived, I can't even think of an example, but basically in the sense that I think it's just getting back to what I was saying before. It's that if you're in that position, I don't know. I don't see anything wrong with it. I can understand his example and I can see the problem that it raises, but at the same time, I don't really necessarily think it's hypocrisy personally. So maybe it is. I don't know, because, if you're withdrawing to a gated community where minorities are not allowed, that's not necessarily saying that you're consenting to that. Maybe you are. If I buy a product from a place that uses child labor, that doesn't mean necessarily that I support harming children or that children should have to work. Or if I buy a product from people who are, making stuff at a sweatshop in, where they're getting paid a quarter, or a dime somewhere in Indonesia or something, that doesn't necessarily mean that I support those bad conditions. Now, of course, we could, really discuss that more in depth, and you can think about whether you in fact are sort of complying. But I'm not a member, and here we go. I guess this is kind of getting at it. I'm not a member of the corporation, so I'm not voting. I have no say in the corporation. I'm just buying an item, and I don't. So, I guess that's how I would distinguish it. That you're in a gated community, but you don't necessarily get to determine the rules, right? Or maybe you were in the community. Okay, here, how about this one? Let's change his facts. You're in the gated community where no minorities are allowed, and you're there because they have the best school system in the whole area. Okay, and that's the only reason you're there. It sucks that minorities aren't allowed. You don't support it, but you voted in each meeting, each homeowners association meeting, to allow minorities. I mean, what say then? And that to me is that's perfect. So all this time I've just wasted. That's the way I would look at working for the government. Unless you were in the government position and then you supported increasing its power, then fine. Yeah, that's horrible, right? But if you're, I mean, you have no say in it. If I'm a police officer, I don't necessarily have a say. Well, I mean, of course you can choose whether to, and that's one of the great reasons why you would want to have a libertarian police officer. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to be a police officer for a brief time, is because you have the discretion to determine whether you're going to arrest someone or not, for the most part, right? So, yeah, I think that's a good example. And then he says, but it's the system, right? And that's what I'm arguing, right? I'm arguing it's the system. I didn't invent it, but couldn't other special interest groups say the same thing? And I don't know what he meant here. I think what he's saying is that we're supposed to, I guess libertarians are supposed to be against special interest groups taking part of the system. And I don't blame them. I don't know if you do, but I don't blame a corporation trying to get a tax break and sending lobbyists. Like, I think lobbyists are horrible, and I don't like it, but at the same time, I'm not against it, and I don't think there's any, they're not the ones instituting the violence. It's the people who are voting for the stuff. So, and if they didn't vote it for it, then I'm okay with you. But as soon as you vote to allow this stuff, then I'm not. There's problematic. So I don't know about that. If you teach others to voluntarily forego the evil material advantages of state power, you must live it. So he asks you to go on strike. So basically what he's saying is, if you're going to use the state power as an academic in this state institution because you're going to be on, well, I think we talk about that. Well, then you have to live it. You can't preach it and then not live it. And I disagree with that because, again, I don't think there's a whole lot of Americans, or I don't even know if it's possible that you could actually live it. Because even being on the internet, I don't know. I don't even know. Like, let's say it was even a private satellite from a private company like Comcast, and that's how you got the internet. And so you didn't have to worry about the wires and all that stuff, and outside the house or onto public lands and stuff. But the company itself still gets corporate benefits from the state. So at that point, I can't buy any product out there. Like, to me, there's a fine line between this absolutist principle where you're demanding someone to not use the state at all. And I don't know how you do that pragmatically. None at all. And it gets back to that non-aggression principle, is that even it itself isn't absolute, because there's exceptions to it. Right? They say children or people who can't consent, or people, they're under guardianship. Well, that's not in the non-aggression principle. That's just something you made up. And what age is that? Oh, when they consent? Well, what age is that? Who determines this stuff? The kid, did he sign a contract saying that age 6 he has the power to go somewhere, or at age 4? What if he thought it was earlier? I don't know. I have problems with that. So, and I would hope that most people would understand what I'm trying to say. Although it might, maybe it is unprincipled. But guess what? The non-aggression principle is unprincipled. And again, I go with the kid's example. If I have my kid, me putting my kid in a seatbelt in my back seat and picking her up and putting her in the seat, I've aggressed on her, right? I've initiated violence or, direct contact with her, and she didn't consent. Now, I could, every time I put her in there, I could say, hey, can I put you in there? Yes. You could argue there's implied consent. Implied consent would then validate my theory of election system at that time. So if that's what you support, then fine. Then you would actually support the idea that you can vote for libertarians and that it doesn't violate the non-aggression principle because you impliedly consent to living under the state because you live in the state. So, fine. And do as I say, not as I do. So we're getting back to that hypocrisy thing. So he quote, Education alone breeds neither virtue nor integrity, but almost inevitably stimulates only the corrosive spectacle of pompous hypocrisy. And he gives a good example. If a parent screams at a child, "Don't yell at others," he is discrediting that advice that he provided through action. Right? And I think that's definitely true. So if I say, but again, I scream. So I tell my kid, "Don't yell at others," but I'm not perfect and I yell at others. So I'm already hypocrisy. I've violated the duty. See, and again, we're getting back to like living like perfect. Nobody's perfect. Okay? And I guess here's the problem. If you assume that that there are people who could be perfect, then maybe you would support what Molyneux's writing here. Okay. But I'm sorry, maybe, but I don't believe that. I don't think anyone's perfect. And I think once you mess up, even just once, and everyone will, because I don't think everyone's perfect or anyone can be perfect, then the hypocrisy, the pompous hypocrisy, this do as I say, not as I do, you violated that. And then you're discredited? Like, no. You're discredited when you when you tell me that you support something and then you do something else. That's when you're discredited. And so if you tell me you don't support the state, but you run for the state office and then you vote for more power for the state, that's the problem. That's the hypocrisy that I'm mad at. But if you say you don't support the state and you drive on a road in the state, well, no, I have no problem with that. Now, maybe there are some people who are listening who have a problem, but I don't. You know why? Because I have no other options. There's no alternatives. Okay? I mean, I guess I could buy a helicopter, but then I have to get it registered and I got to get licensed and all this stuff. So I can't do anything. I could build a tunnel maybe. What a way to live. Like, come on, man. Life is way too short for all this principled garbage that's not going to change anything anyways. Like, nothing's that's why I'm at the golden rule stage. So I don't know if that's I'm putting my hand up. I don't know if there's a stage in libertarianism and understanding it where you just go, you know what? I don't care about anything else. It's the golden rule. I'm just going to treat everyone the way I'd want to be treated. That's my best philosophy personally. Non-aggression principle. So hypocrisy. So again, we're getting back to the hypocrisy thing. And the quote by Molyneux, quote, "When a man claims to dedicate his life to the pursuit and dissemination of virtue and is criticized for moral hypocrisy and the charge sticks, he is degraded to a far lower ethical position than if he had never entered into the arena of moral philosophy in the first place." And so, So I think this goes back to everything I've already said. I think I've said enough. And interestingly enough, this was written, I'm sure you've heard about this, but he had that copyright issue recently where I suppose I don't know, I don't really care, but someone did something and he didn't like it, and he used one of his agents to basically request, they use the DCMA or DMCA, whatever it's called, to ask YouTube to take this video down. Okay. And so regardless of what you think, maybe the video was bad, maybe whatever, but the bottom line is he used the threat, even though it was an institution through YouTube, but it was, it's like when you click on the things and you say report, and for copyright issues. I mean, that's not because of copyright issues from YouTube. That's the law. It's not YouTube's own non-aggression principle that it's created. Now, maybe in the free market, maybe it would have some idea like that, but it's following the law. I would actually think that Google, if YouTube didn't have to deal with that stuff, I don't think they would, because it's very costly too for them. So yeah, so and so what does that mean? So does that mean then that because he used the state, and of course he uses the state, there's no way that he doesn't drive on roads, I've heard him say he pays taxes. He pays taxes. Can you believe that? I mean, that's the worst thing you can do. You're providing money. You're paying someone to kill people. Oh, you evil man, you. That's hypocrisy. See, and that's why I don't I don't care. That's why I'm not trying to make that claim. But he made the claim, though. And so to me, that's where I'm getting at there. This goes back to the hypocrisy thing that we talked about earlier, too. Is that if he didn't make the claim, I would have no issue. Just like if you're Ron Paul, if you're Bernie Sanders and you go into power and you you create another bank that it's a government bank that provides home loans to everybody. Well, they kind of already do that, but let's say it was a little cheaper or something. I don't know, lower interest rate. Well, I don't have a problem with that. But once you say you're not, you're Ron Paul, and if Ron Paul got into office, okay, here's what I'd be mad. If Ron Paul got into office and then he said, you know what, I'm going to let the Fed do more stuff. That's the wrongness. That's evil. I don't know what that is, but that's hypocrisy. No. And so just don't say it. That's all you have to do. And I'm not saying it. So you can't call me out on any of this stuff because I haven't called out anybody. Like, I'm not saying that nobody should not use the state. But if you're going to say something like what Molyneux is saying, then he's using really heavy language in some of these parts, and I think I go later on with it too, then you're wrong. You're in the wrong. Kiss the ring is one section. And this is back to the academic. If A wants to be a professor, he has to kiss ass, basically, to get to the holy grail of tenure, and which is basically just an unjust privilege of a statist monopoly. And once given that unjust privilege, he's going to use it to get more power from the state. So again, I have no support for, I don't know, where the empirical data here is that he's going to use the power from the state if he's a libertarian, right? Are we calling him a libertarian, right? So we're saying he's a Tom Woods, and let's say he's in charge of whatever the public school, because we're talking about public schools, and then he used that to, I don't know, get more power from this. Like, I don't know. Where's the problem there? I'm sorry. I might have to skip some of this because I'm starting to have problems now going over this thing. It's just, it doesn't seem like it's worth the time because this is like you. Right? The reader, the listener, the whatever, the viewer. Okay, if you were unemployed, would you go on unemployment? Well, if you're going on unemployment, you're using the state. You're getting a privilege. You're getting more power from the state, actually, than what you had prior. And you probably haven't, let's say you're a new employee, and you've only been in the system for 3 months and you get fired. So you haven't really necessarily paid into this system. A better example, I guess, would be Social Security. And then you were disabled, and then you asked for SSI benefits, even though you've only worked for 3 years, and you're provided those benefits for the rest of your life. I mean, are you evil? I don't know. I mean, if you're getting benefits from the state, should you only get what you've put into it? Or is it because you're continuously punished through the coercive effects of the state, the main aggressor? Do you deserve as much money as you can get? That goes back to the special interest groups. That goes back to this person who's using the state for his power. Now, if you say you're against it, then yeah, that's completely different. If you say you are against six-figure salaries and you're making $50,000 as a professor, and then when you get into tenure, you then vote to say you should get paid $200,000, but you've been saying for years that they shouldn't be getting six-figure salary, then yeah, that's hypocrisy. That's wrong. Free markets apply to academics. So the price cannot be ascertained in the presence of a coercive monopoly. Right, so one of the hardest parts about schooling and academia in general, is that it's hard to know what the price is of colleges because it's a monopoly. And I would think even for private schools, the price of that isn't necessarily true because of the way the loans and MGI Bill and all that stuff. And basically he says is don't use the state. And what he's arguing is that people should do what he did, like with free domain, and say that academics should submit their goods and services to the iron discipline of the free market. Talk the talk. And if you use the state, he says, quote, "Shut up about the free market. You are an embarrassment." Again, we're using this language that I just don't think is justified when I don't know if, and maybe I'm assuming wrongly that he uses the state. Okay, and I asked this question, I think, to Brett Venat when I did the School Sucks interview. I said something to the effect of, let's say you lived somewhere and you're an anarchist, and you go into a store, an electronics store, and you buy a new laptop, and you walk and you slip on something and you get hurt, and you get hurt so badly that you're paralyzed. Your whole right side of your body is paralyzed, whatever hand you are, the legs, hand, and your arm. Would you sue them? Would you go through state court? Oh, you would? And you call yourself an anarchist? Well, shut up. You are an embarrassment. That's what Stephen Molyneux's saying. I hated saying that. I feel really bad. I apologize. I do not mean I don't mean that. That's what he's saying. I don't know. Maybe he's changed since 2007. You know, I've said some stupid stuff. Or I don't know if it's stupid. I don't even know if what he's saying is stupid. But I would agree in the sense that, you know, you should apply the free market. You know, we should be thinking about this stuff. Like, how do we make education better and not using the state if we don't have to, right? And I'm with that. And I guess I would go even to Bitcoin. Like, let's say you had Bitcoin that was stolen from you. Would you try to initiate some sort of lawsuit against somebody, whether it's civil or criminal? I don't know. You know, it depends, I guess, on how much Bitcoin you have. I would think. I think if you had a lot, you'd probably be like, dude, I got to do something. And so he says the failure of the academic approach. If people know enough about the free market, they will reject statist solutions and pursue free market solutions. So that's the belief, I guess. And but the very existence of free market academics utterly destroys this premise, because it itself rejects free market solutions to education. So here again, I have a problem, and I guess the thing is, if you're talking about a public institution, then maybe you're right. I don't know, but as far as when I'm thinking about Mises people, is that they're not, right? They're a private institution. You know, the Tom Woods radio show, like that's an example of what he's done, what Molyneux's done, and that's how it should be, right? That would be the better academic approach. Or all the little schools they have, the online schools, I don't know what they're called, Liberty Classroom, like those kind of things. That would be the free market approach, right? So yeah, I don't know. So basically, I think what he's getting at is that the academic approach is the idea that if people just knew about it, that people would reject this stuff, right? And then he's getting to the hypocrisy thing. I think we've already answered the hypocrisy thing, so I'm kind of sidelining that argument. So then you're saying if people just knew about it. But the fact is that education, the way it is, it's so horrible that just because you're taught it in school doesn't mean you actually understand it or know it or apply it or learn it or anything, okay? Or that you even want to hear it. So I think that's problematic. And quote, even if everyone in the world got a PhD in free market economics, the world would only become less free, since an advanced degree in Austrian economics only promotes the pursuit of state unions and the evil protection of an unjust monopoly. So again, I don't agree. I don't know. And this, I guess this is sort of like a minarchism approach, is that, well, one, you're assuming that just because you have a PhD in free market economics, you actually understand what you're talking about. So I guess maybe a PhD, I guess maybe you would be at that level that you probably would, although I don't know if you would know everything, but maybe, yeah. I mean, I don't have a PhD, so, but through master's work, I can definitely tell you that graduate school, no. And I can tell you law school, no. Yeah, you don't know any of that stuff. So, and again, I don't think because you're using you're a teacher at a state school, that's hypocrisy. So I've already answered that as well. So let's get to the religious partnership. And so he writes and we're going to probably fly through this because of time and because my kids are probably going to wake up soon, but I don't know. Like a lot of this book, it seems like he's older than me and maybe some of the listeners. So maybe this was problems that were happening in the 70s and 80s where I don't know. So but he writes, the witch doctors have all the money. So since its inception, libertarianism has been tightly wed to and dependent upon the financial support of fundamentalist Christian religious organizations. Remember, he said in the beginning that that's why it's there. The libertarianism movement is there to make money from Christians, right? It's to make money. It's for religious organizations I guess it's basically a lobbyist for religious organizations. I have no idea how in the world that can be true. Just reading I don't know, again, if maybe in the 70s the principles were different then of what libertarians believed in. I tend to think not, because Murray Rothbard was around that time. But now I don't know how, getting rid of tax exemption status for churches helps churches. Like that's one of the first things I would support locally is let's get rid of these tax exemptions for churches. Why aren't they paying for the taxes? I mean, they have to live with society and all that, like how they get to live with the benefits. Let's at least treat everyone equally, right? I don't know how that helps that. I don't know. He says Christian fundamentalists believe government should be limited because there's no authority but God. And I'd probably believe that the few fundamentalists there are out there, we're talking a handful of people, they believe that there should be no government because the ultimate authority is God. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of Christians who believe that the ultimate authority is God, but those who believe that there should be no government, I don't know. It's rare enough to find someone who thinks that there should be no government, but to find someone who thinks that there should be no government simply because God is the government. And I don't even know if that's not even Christian belief. So I mean, you're reading the Bible wrongly, I suppose. He writes, why would a scientific expert join forces with a witch doctor to fight the same enemy? So he's saying, let's say you as the libertarian, let's say you're not a Christian, you're not one of these fundamentalists, you're a scientific expert, okay? Why would you join with a witch doctor, which is the fundamentalist, to fight the same enemy? The expert, if you did, you're ridiculous, quote, and quote, irrational. Again, I don't understand this. It's like, Ralph Nader recently wrote a book. It's like a Divergent or not Divergent. That's a good movie though. I forget what it's called, but something with working convergent. Maybe it rhymes with a movie. I don't know what it is, but it's the idea of working with libertarians to pass legislation and to repeal stuff, right? It's to get rid of stuff. And is what I would, you'd have, in order to be a libertarian, you'd have to, basically every law would be repealing something. It wouldn't be creating a commission to get rid of something. Like to me, that's not libertarianism. So I don't know. But yeah, I have no problem with joining with a witch doctor. And I don't care if someone calls me ridiculous. If you're a libertarian and you care that someone calls you ridiculous, then how are you a libertarian? Because libertarians get called that stuff all the time. So irrational and all that. I have no idea. Like, this is starting to get funny. I don't know. And then he goes with premises and conclusions. So here's the difference, I guess, with religion. This is why religion, basically what he's saying in this section is that if you're religious, if you believe in any God, it doesn't matter even if it's a Christian, that you're irrational. And that because you're irrational, I can't trust you. And so you should not be selling, this is how not to achieve freedom. So in the beginning, it's how not to achieve it. We shouldn't have Ron Paul. So don't support people like Ron Paul. Don't support any political electoral process. It's not, you're looking hypocritical. And so you're irrational. I'm not going to listen to you. And then the second part, with academics. So you're Tom Woods working for the Institute of Mises Institute, whether it's private or public, doesn't matter. I'm not going to listen to you. You're irrational because you're using the state. Damn, golly, this man's, and maybe I'm going to get a lot of hate, but this man's judgment and his requirements, this is called critical thinking is required. And I've recently changed my definition to critical thinking to endless curiosity. It's not application, understanding, analysis, and all blah, 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 this complicated stuff. It's just curiosity. It's just asking questions. You know why? Because my standards are low, okay? And it's high and low at the same time. I just want you to ask a lot of questions. If you could just do that, I'd feel much better about society. Whether you apply it or not doesn't matter. But if you always ask, I mean it does really, but I'm not asking, I'm asking for that minimum, I guess. And he's just asking for, he wants application too. And that's, I don't know. You have there's too many, I don't know, it's just too complicated. But premises. So yeah, I don't know what I was talking about, some of the religion, but yeah, you're irrational. So if you're a Christian, why are you even a libertarian? Why are you spreading the message? Because you're irrational. Nobody's going to listen to you. You're crazy. And I'm sorry, I don't believe that. I'm not sorry. I don't believe that. It's your belief. It's your personal belief. I don't care. We all have our own beliefs. I believe certain parenting styles are better than others. I believe in non-spanking, which I think is something Molyneux believes in. Because you believe in spanking doesn't mean that I'm crazy or that you're crazy. One of us might be immoral because we're violating the non-aggression principle, or you're violating like the golden rule type of thing. But if you would be happy to be spanked as an adult, then, if you wouldn't mind going to work one day and being spanked if you did something wrong, then, I don't have a problem with that. So let's go. Premises and conclusion. Premises. Intellectual integrity demands that we attempt to derive conclusion from principles and rational arguments. And conclusions are in contrast to that. So premises is like we have to empirical data type of thing, and logic, reason. Conclusions are, well, a smarter state is better. Basically, he said if you can teach a parrot to say it, it cannot be considered knowledge. So scientific experiments, empirical data, that's knowledge. A belief in God, that's a conclusion. It's a lie. A smaller state and better, that's a conclusion. It's a lie. It's irrational. I don't know. I don't know if I believe that. To me, it's like really complicated stuff. To me, a conclusion is just a way of saying what you think. So I'm going to say my conclusion. My conclusion, a smaller state's better. My conclusion after reading this book is don't judge other people because you're going to be judged, okay, by these same people. And that's my basically thing. And it doesn't mean that that's irrational because I haven't applied any empirical data. Interestingly enough, this book doesn't include a lot of empirical data, and he points it out at the end, but he just says, he basically just sidelines it, so I don't know. But okay, the tragedy of compromise. Well, it only benefits the least rational, so I think we can all agree with this, that's what compromise does. At the expense of that which is higher, more logical, more noble, more honorable, and more true. A noble woman, quote, a noble woman who marries a corrupt and vicious man does not elevate him. She only debases herself, or rather reveals her own unconscious corruption. Another quote I don't like. He should have had an editor that was like someone who wasn't one of his fans or something, because this is like these are these quotes that just get me not wanting to read anything else he writes. So it's interesting too because it's like what he's saying is that free domain radio and his books and stuff get more people to support the libertarian message. If you listen to his great interview with Joe Rogan and then you listen to some of this stuff that he had, what's a girl from the Young Turks that talked to Joe Rogan afterwards, and they talked about him. They said that he was a crazy guy, that he was a kook and all this stuff. I mean, that's what they literally said. They said it all behind his back too. And I think they may have even said it to him. But so you're telling me what you're doing is working for the movement? That's what he's arguing, because and this is why, because Free Domain has millions of listeners, right? Millions of downloads and hundreds of thousands of listeners. I'm sorry. But the reason he has that is because he's got freaking thousands of episodes. So it's like me. I only have about 100 listeners. Okay. I'm going to let everyone know, but I have 10,000 downloads. That's just because I have a lot of episodes. I have like over 100 episodes. So if 100 people downloaded 100, what's that? 10,000, right? So if you listen to everything at least once, it doesn't mean I have 10,000 people that support my message. And I was thinking about this the other day. Okay, say what? Let's say he does have 100,000 people who support him. And let's say there's 75,000 who actually believe what he's saying. Because, a lot of people listen to him because maybe they heard him say something crazy and they wanted, kind of like why I listen to Sean Hannity sometimes. I heard him say something crazy and I wanted to hear it in my own. Rachel Maddow, all these, Ed Schultz. These are people I give no respect to as far as their professional level. And so, and yes, I was getting with this idea that, okay, so let's say you had 75,000 people. Okay. If you don't see the problem here, because again, what he's saying, and he said this before, is that empirically that shows that his thing is more successful than what all these other people are doing. So what Tom Woods is doing at Von Mises, what Ron Paul is doing, he's saying that empirical data is enough, that there's 75,000 people, and it's unfortunate because I have no idea how you would even get empirical data for Ron Paul, but let's just say you have 75,000 out of 7 billion people. Here, let me give you another example. Here in Jacksonville, Florida, we have a talk radio station that's a Republican, Sean Hannity, all that stuff. And most people who listen to talk radio here listen to that. Let's say out of a city of 800,000 people, let's say 50,000 listen to it. Okay. And 30,000 actually, we're following the same math. Sorry for that. Math. Okay. Or proportionality, whatever the language is. So you have 30,000 people. Okay. Now, he has 75,000 listeners. We have 30,000 listeners who support Sean Hannity just in Jacksonville. We're not counting all the other cities in Florida, all the other cities in the United States, all the other cities in the whole world. And you're telling me what he does works. And I'm sorry, I guess that was a long rant after this quote because, a noble woman who marries someone and debases herself because she marries someone who's corrupt is like Jesus going up to someone who is a prostitute and showing her respect. To me, he's a hero for doing that. Now, to him, Molyneux, it seems like he would be corrupt. He would be in the wrong. And I'm sorry. I don't know how anybody can see that. If I'm working with let's say I was a social worker and I was working with child molesters to help them. I don't know how I would help them, but help them some way. Just because I'm working with them doesn't mean I'm corrupt. Just because I'm working, I've actually done this, helping kids who are very problematic in schools. The kind of kids who they put in jails, in school jails. That's how bad they are. I'm not bad or corrupt because I work with them. I just want to help them. Let's keep going. The PTSD, and that's not, compromise. Yeah, whatever. PTSD religion. So he's basically saying religion is like PTSD. Religion is a form of post-traumatic stress disorder which forms around the fears of abandonment and punishment that children experience if they dare to question the superstitions of their elders. I don't know, dude. Like, people can become religious when they're old. It's not just, and I was taught religion throughout. I mean, I went to private school my whole life, religious schools, and I'm not an atheist per se, but I'm not religious at all. So yeah. Failure to act. No rational moralist can demand of others that which he is not willing to do himself. You know what? I feel like I can't really go on anymore because of the whole copyright thing. And because of the whole book is focused on the idea that if you support the state in any way, and remember, that can be simply just as much as driving on the roads. Okay, that can be just as much as getting a driver's license. That you're evil. You're irrational. You can't be listened to. I don't even think that should be that. I always say critical thinking is thinking outside the box, but sometimes I say there are some thoughts that are just way outside the box. And to me, that's way outside the box. Way outside the box. And so I'm just shortly going through. He talks about psychology a little bit near the end. You can already sense my mood has been slightly depressed. And so the social value of me continuing this has dramatically decreased to the point where I don't want to do it anymore because it does not make me happy. Again, I'm not getting paid. If I was getting paid, I would continue to sound cheerful. So you would want to listen to it so I could sell you things, right? But I'm not. And he talks about some interesting things about psychology, and I'm looking forward to maybe reading one of those books. Although I'm worried that he's going to make these far out claims, these generalizations that apply to everybody, and I'm a little worried about that. But let's do some good thing here. He talks about and I think this was one of his solutions. So how to achieve freedom, and that's self-knowledge. And that's exactly why I have this show. It's one of the many reasons. It's self-knowledge. It's understanding the difference between who you are and what everything else is. It's the slow, according to Molyneux, it's a slow and often painful process of withdrawing your projections from the world so that you can see what the world actually is. To me, it's critical thinking. It's endless curiosity, right? It's asking questions always. Even when you think you know everything, you continue to ask questions. You continue to think about these things. You continue to think about the non-aggression principle. Is it the best one? What is self-ownership? What is aggression? What is self-defense? Can I really, really, really defend others? And who determines that? And what's the punishment? It's those kind of things. And you continuously think about it, and you come up with scenarios and hypotheticals, and you apply it, and you keep working on it. So, and then another interesting point is I don't know. So maturity demands that when we do not know the answer to a question, we state with direct honesty, I do not know. And I completely agree with that. I do not know. And I've said that many times before. In one of the Stitcher reviews, I've been said that I'm not knowledgeable. And I agree. I fully agree. There's a lot of stuff I do not know. And in fact, all the episodes I do, they don't even contain everything out there that could possibly be, when we talk about something like Hamas or ISIS, I can make it look like it was the United States that contributed greatly or basically led to their founding. But it's not just that. It's not just even the founding of Israel, or not the founding, or the UN partition, in the 40s of Israel. It's not just that. It's deeper. And it's beyond an hour-long episode, right? But yeah, that's basically it. I left out some of the ending, and I kind of passed over a few things because my mood is it's depressed. I need to watch something funny, And by the way, we finished watching Traffic Light, and I think I've said this, promoted it before. It's a really funny show. It's on Netflix, as well as The League. The new season of The League just came out, and I watched it in like a day because it was really, and it was sad because it was like the first episodes were really funny, and then it kind of died down. It gets a little too nasty for me, but it's still a really great show. But yeah, that's really, and here's the theme of the book. It's that we need empirical data, and here's some themes, I suppose, that I didn't write down. I'm just thinking about it after talking about everything right now, and it's that we need empirical data, and I support that. I think the Libertarian Party, I've been asked to go door to door. And the reason I don't go to door because I don't know the empirical data. I just don't think it works. I think what people do is, if they are even willing to answer the door, by the way, and actually listen to you, is they're either just trying to make you feel good. So there could be a few of those. They're bored. They need a friend. They want someone to talk to and complain about. And then they're just going to go vote Republican. Or it's just someone who, it's one of those two. Or it's someone that's going to say they support you, but then they don't. Right, your position, and they don't. And so I don't know. I'd like to see empirical data with that. I'd love to see empirical data in the Libertarian Party, although I'm a part of, but I'm not political. I probably would never be. But yeah. And I think the other theme is thinking about continuing to think critically about the relationship between the non-aggression principle and the state, and specifically working for the state. How you'd feel about working for the state. I think there was like a podcast or something. It's an anarchist type podcast where there was some guy who used to be a child protective agency worker, and then he quit because of the non-aggression principle and stuff. And I think that's fine. Like I have no problem with that, right? Like if you understand that. And but at the same time, if you're in the agency and you somehow had the power to only arrest people or to do whatever you wanted, whatever is done, I don't really even know, and take a child away, let's say, in those rare occurrences, if you had the power to say when that would happen, would you do it? And you would look at the non-aggression principle and you would apply that, right? And maybe that's why, that's a great question. See, again, I'm endlessly questioning here, endless curiosity here. Because this kind of goes back to the pushing the magical button. Would you push the magical button that could end the state? I wouldn't, because it's initiating aggression. So maybe I wouldn't be a child protective agency person. But I can tell you this much. If I was a police officer and I went to a house and someone had hit someone else, and I would have no problem. I don't think there's any moral problem, besides, of course, that the state is aggressing with arresting that person. Okay. But at the same time, if I didn't have to arrest them, I wouldn't want to. I would, everything's, and that's why we shouldn't have those positions, right? Because they're just so horrible. You just have too much power. Maybe sometimes the person just doesn't need to be arrested. Maybe they just need to be moved. Let them cool down for a little bit. But maybe you can't do that. And once I that's what probably happened. I'd be an officer for a couple of months. I'd find out that I can't do that, and then I would quit. Right? And I don't know. But I'll tell you this much. I'm not going to say someone that does that is evil or irrational or a statist, because I don't think that helps the movement, this idea of libertarian movement, right? And I'd love to see the empirical data of everyone who thinks that man is evil, that helps this movement. Provide me that data. I'd love to see it. I think it's going to make it worse. I think it's going to make the Palmer riots all over again. It's going to make us hated and despised. You're going to have a Bundy, right? You're going to have more people like Bundy come out. Not to say that what he did was bad. Like, I'm not, you can listen to the show about that to see what he said. But we don't need more people. Well, I'm just going to end it there because Bundy was a different situation because he meant well. This poor guy, like, and I talked about it in the episode, like, he meant well. It just, he came off wrong, unfortunately, because he's white and old and, lives in the country and all that. And yeah, he was holding a dead cow in one of the things, interviews. So, but yeah, that's the episode. That's the show. I hope you learned I hope you learned a lot about this Achieving Freedom by Stefan Molyneux. I'm sure I'll get some people to stop listening and, think critically and continue to think critically. That's all I ask that you do. And I hope that you do that. You don't have to, right? It's all voluntary. But thank you for listening to Critical Thinking is Required. Thank you for everyone's support. And if you have any questions about any of this stuff or you have an insight that you think I would find useful, you can email me at criticalthinkingisrequired@gmail.com or on the Facebook page or on the blog or whatever you want to do. Even on the website, there's a contact page. And I would love to hear some ideas. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you can help me. Maybe you're kind of, you've been in the part of this libertarian journey that I'm currently going through right now, and maybe you're beyond it. You've kind of reached almost the end. You can never reach the end, right? But let's say you're pretty dang close. Maybe you can help me out. Give me some insight. I would love to hear that. And again, that's if you're new to this show and you're actually somehow still listening, that's one of the really things I love about this show is that if you're new to it, you're kind of new to libertarianism, I'm helping you. Like we're kind of going through this together. I've just became a libertarian a few years ago. I've just started reading this stuff maybe a year ago. And I've just started thinking about the non-aggression principle just a few months ago. So it's, we're getting new into this, and you can help me, and I can help you, and we can try to figure this out, whatever the truth is, right? Because that's self-knowledge. There's another good theme that Molyneux had, although it was just in one very short section. But thank you for listening to this show. Thank you for your support, and as always, think critically.